Welcome back. This is the second video of the fifth class for the social psychological perspectives on health. In the first video, we talked about how social status is related to human health. And we discussed the potential causes of, well, not so much about cause, but we talked about how status is related to people's health, even after controlling for health behaviors. And we also talked about possible other causes of health gradient, which is social capital. And in this video, we continue on what social capital is. So in the first video, we talked about the definition of social capital, which was networks together with shared norms, values, and understandings that facilitate cooperation within or among groups. And then this social capital can be divided into two further constructs: bonding and bridging capitals. So bonding capital reflects trust and social cohesion, or in other words, interaction and cross ties between individuals. And then this construct is similar to shared social identity, because when people perceive the shared social identity, they are likely to trust others, and then also they are likely to experience social cohesion among members of the group. And this bonding capital, when this bonding capital is high, it's likely for that individuals to develop bridging capital. This bridging capital is the ability of an individual to take on new group memberships and or their ability to maintain their memberships in important groups. So while bonding capital reflects trust and social cohesion within the group that they already belong, bridging capital refers to the ability to take on new group membership or to join a new group and maintain their membership in a group that they already belong. And they argue that more bonding capital leads to more bonding and bridging capital. So you can imagine that each friend has two friends of his or her, and person A, who has only one friend, so let's say this is person A. Let's say person A has only one friend, and then as I said, each friend has two more friends. So in this social network, or in this bonding capital that A has, A could only reach to two additional people: friends, friends. But let's say person B has three friends, and as I said, each friend has two additional friends. So in this social network, person B could reach to 6 friends. So this example tells that how the initial bonding capital makes a big difference when it comes to the bridging capital. So here only like the difference is 4, but let's say friend also has 2 additional friends. Then person A could reach to additional 4 friends, but person B could reach to additional 12 friends. So the more they have bonding capital, they would have even more bridging capital. Okay. But note that social capital has been criticized for the looseness and broadness of the concept. So people argue that because this construct does not have definitive definition, it would be very difficult to critically examine how this construct affects our health and behaviors, nor it be difficult to disprove the effect of this social capital. While there is a criticism against this construct, in the previous studies, like the biomedical approach has focused on behaviors that individuals should engage in to improve their health. Research on social determinants which focus on bonding capitals and social network has led us to focus more on the ways in which individuals' social environment needs to be improved. So to repeat, biomedical approach suggests that individuals should change their behaviors in order for them to be healthy. But here, social determinants, research on social determinants suggests that the society, the social environment should be changed so that individuals can be healthy. So in this regard, social determinants of health seems to have commonalities with the social identity approach, as social identity approach argues that not only individuals need to change, but society needs to change. Social identity approach argues that society needs to change so that individuals can develop stronger and more broader or multiple social identities. Okay. So to further illustrate what the traditional biomedical approach suggests to be healthy, there is a table in the textbook, and then they give 10 tips for better health. So one, don't smoke. If you can, stop. If you can't, cut down the number of cigarettes. 2, follow a balanced diet with plenty of fruit and vegetables. 3, keep physically active. 4, manage stress by talking things through and making time to relax. 5, if you drink alcohol, do so in moderation. 6, cover up in the sun and protect children from sunburn. 7, practice safer sex. 8, take up cancer screening opportunities. 9, be safe on the roads. Follow the highway code. 10, learn the first aid ABCs, airways, breathing, and circulation. So you can see that this traditional biomedical approach suggests some behaviors that each individual should take. It primarily focuses on changing individuals, not the society. But let's look at 10 alternative tips for better health, which may be suggested by the research on social determinants of health. First, don't be poor. If you can, stop. If you can't, try not to be poor for long. Don't live in a deprived area. If you do, move. And third, let's sleep. 4, don't work in a stressful, low-paid manual job. 5, don't live in damp, low-quality housing or be homeless. 6, be able to afford to pay for social activities and annual holidays. 7, don't be a lone parent. 8, claim all the benefits to which you are entitled. 9, be able to afford your own car. 10, use education to improve your socioeconomic position. Well, I expect that these tips would be focusing more on social factors, but actually it still talks a lot about individual behaviors, I think. But I think the point here is that not so much about how individuals should behave or what kind of actions individuals should take, but here it talks a lot about the social situations that people are in, you know. Don't stay being poor or don't live in a deprived area or don't work in a bad stressful job or don't live in a house. You know, these tips really focus on situations that people may be in. And when they are in those situations, maybe they should leave the place, the situations. But if you look at the 10 traditional tips, it really focuses on individuals and it doesn't talk about situations. I think, well, at surface, it may not be so apparent, but if you can look at what they are talking, you should notice that 10 traditional tips don't talk about situations, while 10 alternative tips actually talk about situations. And then they suggest that when they are in a bad situations, they should leave the situations. Okay. So, yeah, we have talked about biomedical approach and then social approach. And now let's look at the social identity approach to social status and health. In this literature, status is defined as the position of a group in the social hierarchy of a given society or culture relative to other groups. So remember the animal studies. In the animal studies, the status usually refers to the position of an individual in a group, all right? But in social identity approach, status refers to the position of a group in society. Okay. So a poor man in Japan could be richer than a man in poor foreign country, but the man in Japan would be less healthy because his health is influenced by the comparison with others whom the man compares every day. So remember, the status is defined in relation to other relevant outgroups, right? So a poor man in Japan would not compare rich men in poor country, but a poor man would compare themselves with even poorer men or richer men in Japan because this is their relevant outgroups. If they categorize themselves or if they feel that they are part of a poor people group, then they are likely to compare themselves with those people or a group of those people who earn more money, those who have more assets, those who are rich. And then because from this comparison, poor men may experience poor health condition. So relative standing determines health outcomes, not the absolute standing, okay? So if you simply calculate the amount of money people have in Japan and in other poor countries, then maybe poor men in Japan have more money in absolute degree, but it doesn't mean that they are more healthy than the man in poor country. This is more psychological phenomena that by comparing the self with others, the other people in the relevant art groups, their health status would be different, would be changed. Okay, so groups and status. Groups, wealth, education, and social standing determines health, status. So for people, their social status would be determined how much wealth they have, or what kind of education they received, or in which position they are standing in the society. So these will determine individual status. And so those who belong to groups with superior wealth, education, and social standing achieve positive identity. In other words, they will achieve positive identity, and thus they will experience high self-esteem and high well-being. This is especially true if individuals strongly identify with their group or seeing the social identity as an important part of self. So as we have been saying that even if you belong to a group, it doesn't mean that, even if you belong to a positively evaluated group, it doesn't automatically mean that you have a better well-being. Instead, if you belong to a positively evaluated group and you identify with that group, then you should experience better health. So let's look at some example. This is a study conducted by Sunny and colleagues in 2010. So people usually identify more strongly with a high rather than low status groups because it gives a positive identity. And a stronger group identification works as a psychological resource, which thus leads to better health. And then this study looks at the prison girls in Italy and families in Scotland. So they use different groups and then they studied with different population. And then, but still they found a consistent result, such as when people perceive the status of in-group as high, then they would develop stronger in-group identification. So there is a positive association between two variables. Okay. So if they perceive their in-group as in high status, then they are more likely to develop stronger in-group identification. When the passive status is high, the in-group identification is also high. And when they develop stronger identification, they are less likely to be depressed, and they are more likely to be satisfied with their life. And then even they experience less perceived stress. So there is a negative association between the in-group identification and depression. And there is a positive association between in-group identification and the satisfaction with their life. And there is a negative association between in-group identification and perceived stress. And this figure is actually pretty much kind of similar to the ones we have seen in chapter 1 here. So actually this was chapter 2 maybe. So in this figure, it tells that when the status of the group is high, those who belong to that group are more likely to develop stronger social identification. So there is a positive association between the status of the group and social identification. And here I talked about permeability of the group. So when people develop stronger social identification, they would perceive the permeability of the group as low. So they would perceive low permeability in that group, meaning that when they have strong social identification, they feel that it would not be easy, or it would be difficult for them to leave the group. And because it's, well, not only leave, but it will be difficult to leave and re-enter into the group. And when they perceive the low permeability of the group, then they are less likely to leave the group. It's difficult to leave and re-enter the group, then they are unlikely to leave the group. And also when they develop a strong social identification, they are less likely to leave the group. Okay. So let's move back to where we were. So what Sunny found was that they looked at the real, they looked at group identification with the real groups, like prison girls and families. But as we have been seeing, researchers have done many studies with minimal groups. And in a minimal group paradigm, the relationship between status and identification may be present only in comparison to outgroups. So in a minimal group paradigm, they cannot see how good their group is, like how high the status of their group is. So in a minimal group paradigm, the impact or the effect of perceived status in group may be present only in comparison to groups. And then also several studies have examined the impacts of interaction between members in the minimal group paradigm. And then usually in the minimal group paradigm, participants do not have any interactions within the members, between members. But there are several studies that also introduce the members interaction. And in such a study, when there is a good amount of interaction between members, and when there is a good amount of interaction between members, that would be called common bond group, and compared to common identity group. So when there is a good amount of interaction, the effect of status is weaker. So people can develop group identification through interacting with other members. Okay. So status is not the only source of stronger group identification, but even when the status is low, or even if they do not know how high the status of their group is, they can still develop stronger group identification through interacting with other group members, with the members of the group. Okay. So as I have said, when people perceive the status of their group as low, they would develop lower or weaker in-group identification. But this doesn't mean that low social status or disadvantaged groups would lead to low well-being or low self-esteem. People in low status groups can actually search and often find ways to achieve positive identity. So as I said, status is not the only way to achieve positive identity. And then people may positively interact with members of the group, and then that would lead to higher, stronger group identification, which in turn results in higher well-being. And then I guess there's other different ways to achieve positive identity. So first, resisting identification with disadvantaged groups. So in this case, they are not gonna achieve positive identity with a given group at hand, but instead they would deny the group membership to disadvantaged groups. So the example of a disadvantaged group is homeless. So being poor, having poor health and being homeless are mutually related. Those who have poor health tend to be homeless, and those who are homeless tend to have poor health. And then in the study done by Walter and then others in 2015, they interviewed some homeless people, and then they found that 55% described themselves as homeless, while 31% refused to describe themselves as homeless. And then if you look at the textbook, the examples given in the textbook are very interesting. So maybe you should look at the textbook, but to give you some example, for example, to me, homeless is on the street. This is a hostel, so they are basically at the hostel or shelter, and it's a refugee. It's a roof over your head, a shower, food. So I wouldn't say I was homeless. I've got somewhere to go every day to sleep. So I don't say I'm homeless. And the reason that they are at the shelter, or reason that they are actually interviewed, is that they are homeless because they are homeless. But they try to find ways to deny such categorization. And interestingly, those who rejected homeless self-categorization reported higher well-being. So throughout this course, we have said that belonging to groups is good for our well-being. But here, if people identify themselves as a member of homeless, then they would experience lower well-being. So whether belonging to groups can actually benefit our well-being or not depends on the positivity of the group. So if people feel that some groups so from their perspective, if some groups are very negative, belonging to such groups would actually result in poor well-being. Okay, so self-categorization is not objective status, but active process of identity negotiation. So yeah, from objective status, these people were homeless, but whether they actually achieve the identity of homeless depends on how they accept or deny their situation and then their status. So for well-being, how one perceives oneself is more important than how one may be objectively categorized. So from the perspective of others, these people described in the textbook are homeless, but from the eyes of theirs, they do not see themselves as homeless, and then those who do not see themselves as homeless actually experience higher well-being. So it means that how one perceives oneself is more important than how others categorize them. Okay, so there was one strategies that the people may take when they are likely to, well, when they are in a disadvantaged groups. Another strategy that people may take is emphasizing identification with a high status group. So people usually do not belong to only one group, but they usually belong to several groups. And as people belong to multiple groups, they strengthen and emphasize their identification with a high status group. And this gives relatively positive identity compared to other low status group identity, and also reduce negative effects on health and well-being. So multiple group memberships may reduce association between group status and self-esteem, while increased association between multiple group memberships and psychological health, such as self-esteem. And this is because people can emphasize their identification with a relatively positive group among the groups they belong to. And this is a illustrative figure of what I have just said. So as we have seen, group status is positively related to self-esteem, maybe through the indirectly through the group identification. Okay, so it means that higher group status should lead to higher self-esteem through high in-group identification. So this means that if they belong to lower group, then they will experience lower self-esteem. But people do not belong to only one group that would be categorized based on the group, based on the status of the group. They may belong to other groups, and then if they belong more groups besides the lower status group, they can emphasize the identification with those other groups. And then people may say that, yeah, I belong to that disadvantaged low status group, but that's just a part of myself. But I have a lot more aspects of myself. And then because, yeah, I have the kind of part of myself, but still I have a lot of good aspects of myself that may be associated with other group identities. And this kind of thinking would actually help them to improve their self-esteem. Okay. People basically can emphasize their identification with relatively positive group so that the impact of one group with low status would be reduced. Okay. So yeah, the first one was resisting identification with disadvantaged groups. And the second one, yeah, accepting the identification with disadvantaged groups, but they emphasize identification with a high status group. And the third one is leaving disadvantaged groups. Okay, so they do not really find the ways to, whoa. Here, they do not really find ways to achieve positive identity, but basically they resist or I emphasize other identity or leave the groups. Okay, so leaving disadvantaged groups. This strategy may be taken when boundaries between groups are permeable and allow for individual mobility. So this is something we have talked in the previous class. The permeability refers to the easiness that an individual can join or leave a group when they see that they can easily join or leave the group. They see that the permeability is high. And when they see the permeability high, they are likely to leave the group, or when they are likely to leave the disadvantaged groups. So let's think about these two different kinds of groups. that are defined by ethnicity and hobby club. Which group do you think the permeability is high? Yes, hobby group should have higher permeability because it should be easy to join or leave the group. But ethnicity is something that you are born with, right? So Asian people cannot be like white American, and then they rejoin the Asian later. It would be too difficult. So usually ethnicity is something, ethnicity has very low permeability, impermeable, okay? And when individual mobility is an option, that means that when people can actually leave the group, it could still have a negative impact. So even if they can leave the disadvantaged groups, there may be a negative impact of leaving the group, because an individual may be criticized by members of a group she or he left, while members of a group she or he newly joined may not treat him or her well. So there is a study of African Americans moving to a white community in the US by Postmus and Branscombe. When they leave the Black community, Black people would be rejected by white Americans as being different. Black people and white people, they look different, and based on such difference, they may be rejected by the new group or white community here. And then these Black people may be rejected by former in-group as being deserters or traitors. So basically, okay, you left us and then you joined the white community. So you are no longer a part of us. You are not the member of our group. So this kind of sentiment or expression may be provided by the four members of the former in-group, in this case, Black community. And also those who left the group, they tend to feel that in order to be accepted, they have to cut their contact with a former group and thus lose social support. So in order to be a good member of new community, they tend to feel that, okay, I cannot just rely on the members of the former group. I need to establish new contacts with members of a new group. So they tend to refrain from having contacts with members of a former group. And by refraining the contacts, they would lose social support from the members of a former group. So individual mobility has a trade-off of a gain of social status. If that's upper mobility, then they would have a better social status, but they would lose social support from former group. So if you know the song by Sting, this is the song called Englishman in New York. And in the song, the singer sings that I'm an alien, I'm an Englishman in New York. So basically, it sings about a man in a new Englishman in New York, and then they think that, well, I'm an outsider here. I do not really belong to here. Well, I came to New York, but I do not feel member of this community, but I also no longer the member of the former community. So it basically sings about loneliness or people in a new community. Well, some people say that Kansai-nese in Tokyo, Kansaijin in Tokyo. So when people from Kansai left their Kansai area, the members of the former group. So meaning that people who still live in Kansai tend to say that, well, you left Kansai, so you are no longer Kansai-jin or Kansai-nese anymore, and then maybe you do not speak the Kansai dialect anymore, and then you really belong to Tokyo, so you not our friend anymore. And this is just like teasing. They're not really serious, but I think there is the same sentiment or same emotions going on here. Okay, so we have talked about how people would respond when they belong to when they are likely to be categorized as group member of a disadvantaged group. So they are resisting, emphasizing identification with a high status group and leaving disadvantaged groups. And then in the next class, I will talk about if leaving a group is impossible. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.